The city never truly sleeps, and neither does Nathaniel Brooks. At 32, he owned half of downtown Boston, controlled 3 major corporations, and commanded respect from everyone who knew his name. Yet on this particular Tuesday night, at 11:30, he found himself walking alone through Riverside Park. Instead of reviewing quarterly reports in his penthouse office, the autumn air was crisped against his face as his expensive leather shoes clicked against the cobblestone path. Most people would find it strange that a billionaire chose to walk through a public park at such a late hour, but Nathaniel had always found solace in solitude. The darkness felt honest to him, free from the fake smiles and calculated conversations. That filled his days. He was thinking about tomorrow's board meeting when something caught his attention near the old fountain. A figure was curled up on one of the wooden benches, partially hidden by shadows. As he moved closer, he realized it was a young woman. Fast asleep with nothing but a thin jacket protecting her from the cold night air, Nathaniel stopped walking and studied her face in the pale moonlight. She looked to be in her mid-20s, with long auburn hair that fell in gentle waves across her shoulders. Her features were delicate but showed signs of exhaustion, and her clothes, though clean, were clearly worn from use. Beside her on the bench lay a small canvas bag and what appeared to be art supplies scattered around. Something about the scene stirred an unfamiliar emotion in Nathaniel's chest. He had walked past countless homeless individuals during his business travels, always quick to look away or cross to the other side of the street. But this woman was different somehow. She looked peaceful despite her circumstances, as if she had found a moment of rest in a world that seemed determined to keep her awake without fully understanding why. Nathaniel removed his expensive wool coat and gently draped it over her sleeping form. The woman stirred slightly, but didn't wake, pulling the warm fabric closer to herself instinctively. As he watched her settle back into sleep, Nathaniel noticed a small silver locket around his neck. One he had worn since childhood, but never really thought about. The locket had been his mother's. The only thing he had left of her after the accident that took both his parents when he was just 8 years old. He rarely looked at it anymore, but tonight something compelled him to remove the chain and place it carefully beside the sleeping woman on the bench. Nathaniel stepped back and looked at the scene once more before turning to continue his walk. He told himself it was just a moment of unusual generosity. Nothing more. Tomorrow he would return to his cold office and demanding schedule, and this strange encounter would become nothing but a distant memory. The next morning arrived with the usual chaos of phone calls and meetings, but Nathaniel found his thoughts drifting back to the park and the mysterious woman. He wondered if she had found the coat and locket, if she was safe, if she had somewhere to go. These thoughts bothered him more than he cared to admit. So he threw himself into work with even greater intensity than usual. Meanwhile, across town, Grace Mitchell was having the most confusing morning of her life. She had awakened at sunrise on the park bench, wrapped in the softest coat she had ever felt, and wearing a beautiful silver locket that definitely hadn't been there when she fell asleep. The coat smelled like expensive cologne and cedar, while the locket felt warm against her skin as if it had been worn by someone who truly cherished it. Grace had been living on the streets for 2 weeks now, ever since she lost her job at the art gallery and couldn't afford rent on her tiny studio apartment. She had been too proud to ask her friend Emma for help, choosing instead to sleep in parks and spend her days in coffee shops, sketching portraits for spare change and applying for any job she could find. The mysterious gifts felt like a sign that perhaps her luck was finally changing. The coat would keep her warm during the cold autumn nights, and the locket, while clearly valuable, gave her hope that someone in this vast city actually cared about her well-being. Grace spent the morning walking through downtown Boston, clutching the coat around her shoulders and touching the locket for comfort. She stopped at every business with a help wanted sign, but most employers took one look at her disheveled appearance and dismissed her immediately. By evening, Grace was exhausted and discouraged. She found herself back at the park, sitting on the same bench where she had spent the previous night. As she watched the sun set behind the city's skyline, she made a decision. She would find whoever had given her these gifts and thank them properly. More than that, She would prove herself worthy of such unexpected kindness. The next day brought a stroke of luck when Grace saw a job posting for night cleaning staff at Brooks Industries. It's one of the most prestigious companies in the city. Pay was modest but steady, and the night hours meant she could continue looking for better opportunities during the day. She applied immediately and was surprised when they called her back that same afternoon for an interview. Robert Hayes, Nathaniel's assistant, conducted the interview in a small office on the building's 15th floor. Grace had spent her last few dollars on a simple black dress from a thrift store and had tied her hair back in a neat bun. She still wore the mysterious locket hidden beneath the dress's collar. "Miss Mitchell," Robert said, reviewing her application. "I see you have some experience in customer service and retail management. Can you tell me why you're interested in a cleaning position?" Grace took a deep breath before answering honestly. "I need steady work while I figure out my next steps. I know this might not be my dream job, but I promise you won't find anyone more dedicated or hard-working. I understand the value of honest work, and I'll treat this building like it's my own home." Something in her sincerity must have impressed Robert because he hired her on the spot. Grace would start the following Monday, working the night shift from 10 in the evening until 6 in the morning. The job came with a uniform, basic health insurance, and access to the employee break room during her shifts. Grace's first night at Brooks Industries was overwhelming. The building rose 47 floors into the Boston sky, with each level representing millions of dollars in business deals and corporate decisions. She was assigned to floors 20 through 25, responsible for emptying trash, mopping floors, and maintaining the cleanliness of offices and conference rooms. As she worked her way through the quiet hallways, Grace found herself wondering about the people who occupied these spaces during the day. She imagined their important meetings and crucial phone calls, their stress and their triumphs. The art supplies she kept hidden in her bag seemed small and insignificant compared to the power that flowed through these walls each day. It was nearly 2 in the morning when Grace encountered her first and only coworker of the night. She was mopping the floor near the elevator bank when she heard footsteps approaching. Looking up, she saw a tall man in a dark security uniform walking toward her. "You must be the new cleaner," he said with a slight smile. His voice was deep and warm, carrying just a hint of an accent she couldn't place. "I'm Nathan. I work security on the overnight shift." Grace straightened up, suddenly conscious of her appearance. The man was strikingly handsome, with dark hair and intense green eyes that seemed to see everything. Despite his casual security uniform, he carried himself with an unusual confidence that made Grace's heart beat a little faster. "I'm Grace," she replied, tucking a strand of loose hair behind her ear. "This is my first night, so please be patient with me if I do something wrong." Nathan's smile widened slightly. "I'm sure you'll do just fine, and these floors can get pretty lonely at night, so it's nice to have some company." They talked for nearly an hour, standing in the empty hallway as Grace's mop bucket grew cold beside them. Nathan asked about her background, her interests, her dreams for the future. He listened intently as she spoke about her love for art and her hope to one day open her own gallery in return. Nathan shared stories about his work, his late-night walks around the city, and his love for classical music. Grace found herself drawn to his quiet intelligence and the way he seemed genuinely interested in her thoughts and opinions. When their conversation finally ended, Grace felt lighter than she had in months. "Same time tomorrow night?" Nathan asked as he prepared to continue his rounds. "I'll be here," Grace replied, already looking forward to seeing him again. As Nathan disappeared around the corner, Grace touched the locket at her throat and smiled. Perhaps her guardian angel had given her more than just a warm coat and beautiful jewelry. Perhaps he had also led her to this place, this job, and this mysterious man who made her believe that better days might actually be ahead. 3 weeks had passed since Grace started working at Brooks Industries. Her nightly conversations with Nathan had become the highlight of her entire day. She found herself rushing through her cleaning duties just to have more time to talk. With him in the quiet hallways of the 23rd floor, Nathan always appeared around the same time each night, carrying a steaming cup of coffee and wearing that same gentle smile that made Grace's heart skip. He would lean against the wall while she worked, sharing stories about books he had read or places he wanted to visit someday. Grace discovered that beneath his quiet exterior, Nathan possessed a brilliant mind and a surprisingly romantic soul.
Oh.
"Me about your art," Nathan said one Thursday night, as Grace organized supplies in a storage closet. "What kind of things do you like to paint?" Grace paused, her hands still holding a stack of paper towels. Most people asked about her art out of politeness, but Nathan's question felt genuine. "I paint people mostly. Not portraits exactly, but moments. Like a mother reading to her child, or an elderly couple holding hands on a park bench. I try to capture the emotions that pass between people." "That sounds beautiful," Nathan replied softly. "I would love to see your work sometime, maybe someday," Grace said, though she couldn't imagine showing her amateur paintings to someone as sophisticated as Nathan clearly was. Despite his security uniform, there was something refined about the way he spoke and moved that suggested he came from a world very different from hers. As the weeks continued, their conversations grew deeper and more personal, Nathan told Grace, about growing up in a large, lonely house where silence was more common than laughter. He spoke about feeling disconnected from the world around him, as if he were watching life through a window instead of actually living it. Grace shared her own story about the children's home, where she had spent most of her childhood. She told Nathan about the kind nun who had taught her to paint, about the other children who had become her makeshift family, and about the dreams she carried of one day creating art that would touch people's hearts. "I used to have a friend at the home," Grace said one night, as they sat together on a bench in the building's small rooftop garden. Nathan had discovered this hidden space during one of his security rounds and had started bringing Grace there. During her breaks, his name was Timothy, and he was the kindest person I've ever known. He used to say that everyone has a special light inside them, but sometimes life covers it up with so much pain that people forget how to shine. Nathan turned to look at her in the moonlight, his expression thoughtful. "What happened to Timothy?" "He was adopted when we were both 12. I was happy for him, of course, but losing him felt like losing a piece of my soul. We promised to find each other again someday, but that was 14 years ago." "People change. Lives move on." Grace touched the silver locket at her throat, a habit she had developed over the past month. "Sometimes I wonder if he even remembers me." "I'm sure he does," Nathan said quietly. "Some connections are too strong to be forgotten by time or distance." Their friendship was slowly transforming into something deeper, though neither of them spoke about it directly. Grace found herself thinking about Nathan during her days off, wondering what he did when he wasn't working security at Brooks Industries. Nathan seemed equally captivated by Grace, often staying long past the end of his shift just to extend their conversations. One rainy Friday night in late November, Nathan arrived for their usual meeting, carrying a small wrapped package. "I have something for you," he said, looking almost nervous as he handed it to Grace. Inside the wrapping was a set of professional watercolor paints and brushes, far more expensive than anything Grace could have afforded for herself. "Nathan, I can't accept this," she protested, though her fingers were already caressing the beautiful supplies. "This must have cost you a week's salary." "Please," Nathan said, his voice gentle but firm. "You have so much talent, Grace. You deserve to have proper tools to express it. Consider it an early Christmas present." Grace felt tears welling up in her eyes. No one had ever given her such a thoughtful, generous gift. "Thank you," she whispered. "This means more to me than you could possibly know," that night Nathan suggested. They skipped their usual conversation and go somewhere special. "There's a place I'd like to show you," he said mysteriously. "Somewhere I go when I need to think." They took the elevator to the very top of the building, floor 47, where Nathan used a security card to access a door Grace had never noticed before. Beyond the door was a stunning rooftop terrace with panoramic views of the entire city. Boston stretched out below them like a carpet of twinkling lights, beautiful and vast and full of possibilities. "This is incredible," Grace breathed, walking to the edge of the terrace. "How did you know about this place?" "I have my ways," Nathan replied with a mysterious smile. In truth, he had designed this terrace himself 3 years earlier, but Grace didn't need to know that. "I come here sometimes, when the world feels too heavy," stood together in comfortable silence, watching the city pulse with life below them. Grace had never felt so peaceful, so perfectly content to be exactly where she was. Nathan's presence beside her felt natural and right, as if they were two pieces of a puzzle that had finally found their proper place. "Grace," Nathan said softly. Turning to face her, "I need to tell you something." Before he could continue, Grace stepped closer to him, her heart racing with anticipation. "What is it?" Nathan looked into her eyes, and for a moment Grace thought she saw something familiar there, something that reminded her of a memory just beyond her reach. "I care about you," he said simply, "more than I ever expected to care about anyone." "Care about you too," Grace replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Nathan reached up to touch her face, his fingers gentle against her cheek. "You make me want to be a better man," he said. "You make me remember what it feels like to hope." When their lips met, it felt like coming home. The kiss was soft at first, tentative and sweet, but quickly deepened as years of loneliness and longing poured out between them. Grace felt as if every broken piece of her heart was being carefully put back together by Nathan's touch. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing heavily. Grace rested her forehead against Nathan's chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. "I think I'm falling in love with you," she admitted quietly. Nathan's arms tightened around her. "I know I'm falling in love with you," he replied, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. They stayed on the rooftop until nearly dawn, talking and kissing and planning a future that felt suddenly possible. Nathan spoke about wanting to travel the world with Grace, to see her art displayed in galleries, to build a life together filled with laughter and joy. Grace talked about the children they might have someday, about the home they would create together, about growing old while still holding hands like the couples she loved to paint. As the sun began to rise over Boston, casting golden light across the terrace, Grace felt truly happy for the first time in years. She had found her person, her kindred spirit, her other half. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she knew they could face them together. "I should probably get you home," Nathan said reluctantly as the city began to wake up around them. "You need sleep, and I have some things I need to take care of today." Grace nodded, though she was reluctant to leave this magical place where everything felt possible. As they rode the elevator down together, she couldn't stop smiling. "Nathan," she said, as they reached the lobby, "what's your last name? I realize I don't even know your full name." Nathan hesitated for just a moment, his hand tightening slightly on hers. "Reed," he said finally. "Nathan Reed." Grace smiled and squeezed his hand. "Grace Mitchell and Nathan Reed," she said, testing how their names sounded together. "I like the way that sounds." Nathan walked Grace to the bus stop, kissing her goodbye before she climbed aboard the early morning bus that would take her back to the small room she now rented from her friend Emma. As the bus pulled away, Grace pressed her face to the window and waved until Nathan disappeared from sight. Neither of them noticed the black sedan parked across the street, or the photographer inside taking pictures of their farewell kiss. Neither of them realized that their secret romance was about to become front-page news, that everything they had built together was about to come crashing down around them. For now, in this perfect moment, they were simply Grace and Nathan, two lonely souls who had found each other in the darkness and chosen to step together into the light. The morning after their rooftop kiss, Grace floated through her day like she was walking on clouds. She had finally moved into a tiny studio apartment with help from her friend Emma, and now she spent her free time painting with the beautiful supplies Nathan had given her. Her latest canvas showed two silhouettes against a city skyline, their hands intertwined as they looked out at a world full of possibilities. Emma noticed the change in her roommate immediately. "Grace, you're practically glowing," she said over breakfast. "This security guard must be something special." "He is," Grace replied, touching the silver locket that had become her constant companion. "Emma, I think he might be the one. I know it sounds crazy after only a few weeks, but when I'm with him, everything feels right, like I've been waiting my whole life to find him." Emma smiled, but looked concerned. "Just be careful, okay? Sometimes people aren't exactly who they seem to be." Grace dismissed her friend's worry with a wave of her hand. "Nathan is different. He's honest and kind and real. I trust him completely." That evening, Grace arrived at Brooks Industries early, eager to see Nathan and tell him about the painting she had been working on. She was humming softly to herself as she gathered her cleaning supplies, already planning their conversation for later that night. But Nathan didn't appear at their usual meeting time. Grace waited in the hallway where they always met, checking her watch every few minutes. An hour passed, then two. Finally, she decided to look for him, thinking perhaps he was dealing with a security issue elsewhere in the building. Grace had never ventured above the 25th floor, but tonight, her concern for Nathan gave her courage. She took the elevator up to the executive floors, reasoning that a security guard might have business anywhere in the building. The 35th floor was unlike anything Grace had ever seen. The hallways were lined with expensive artwork. The carpets were thick and luxurious, and everything spoke of wealth and power. Grace felt out of place in her simple cleaning uniform, but she pressed on, determined to find Nathan. She was walking past a conference room when she heard familiar voices through the partially open door. Her heart leaped with relief when she recognized Nathan's voice, but her joy quickly turned to confusion as she listened to the conversation. "Sir, the board meeting has been moved to tomorrow morning," a man was saying, "and the contracts from the Singapore deal need your signature before the weekend." "Fine," came Nathan's reply. But his tone was completely different from the gentle way he had always spoken to Grace. This voice was sharp, authoritative, commanding. "Have my lawyer review the terms one more time. I don't want any surprises." Grace moved closer to the door, her heart beginning to race with a terrible suspicion. Through the crack, she could see Nathan sitting behind a massive desk in what was clearly an executive office. But he wasn't wearing a security uniform. Instead, he wore an expensive suit that probably cost more than Grace made in 6 months. "Also," Nathan continued, "I want you to handle that photography situation discreetly. Someone was taking pictures outside the building yesterday morning. Make sure it doesn't happen again." "Of course, Mr. Brooks," the other man replied. "Is there anything else you need tonight?" Grace's world tilted sideways. Mr. Brooks. Nathan was Nathaniel Brooks, the billionaire CEO whose company she cleaned. Every night, the man she had fallen in love with was not a security guard at all, but one of the most powerful men in Boston. Grace stumbled backward from the door, her cleaning cart bumping into the wall with a loud crash. The sound echoed through the quiet hallway like a gunshot. "What was that?" she heard Nathan ask from inside the office. Grace panicked and ran. She abandoned her cart and raced for the elevator, her hands shaking so badly she could barely press the buttons. As the elevator descended, tears began streaming down her face. Everything had been a lie. Their conversations, their connection, their love, all of it built on deception. By the time Grace reached the lobby, she was sobbing. The security guard at the front desk looked at her with concern, but she rushed past him and out into the cold December night. She ran through the streets of Boston, not caring where she was going, just needing to escape the pain that felt like it was tearing her apart from the inside. Grace ended up at the same park where this whole nightmare had started. She collapsed. Onto the bench where she had once slept, pulling Nathan's coat around her shoulders. The coat that now felt like mockery, like a cruel reminder of how naive she had been. How could I have been so stupid? She cried into the empty night. How could I not have seen it? The next morning, Grace's face was on the front page of 3 different tabloid newspapers. The headlines screamed things like "Billionaire's Secret Love Affair" and "CEO Romances Cleaning Lady." The photographs showed her and Nathan kissing goodbye at the bus stop, her face clearly visible while his was partially obscured. Emma found Grace sitting on their kitchen floor, surrounded by the newspapers, crying over the ruined remains of the painting she had been working on. "Grace, honey, what happened?" Through her tears, Grace told Emma everything, about Nathan really being Nathaniel Brooks, about the lies, about seeing her face plastered across the tabloids like some kind of scandal. "They're calling me a gold digger," Grace sobbed. "They're saying I seduced him for his money. But Emma, I swear I didn't know who he was. I loved Nathan the security guard, not Nathaniel Brooks the billionaire." Emma held her friend close, furious, on her behalf. "This isn't your fault, Grace. He's the one who lied to you." Meanwhile, in his penthouse office, Nathaniel was pacing like a caged animal. Robert Hayes sat quietly in a corner, having delivered the morning papers and witnessed his boss's complete breakdown. "Find her," Nathaniel said for the 10th time. "That hour, I don't care what it costs. Find Grace and bring her to me so I can explain. Sir, Robert said gently, perhaps she needs some time to process everything. The newspapers have been quite harsh. Nathaniel stopped pacing and looked at his assistant with wild eyes. I've lost her, haven't I? The one person who ever loved me for who I really am, and I've lost her because I was too much of a coward to tell her the truth. For 3 days, Nathaniel tried everything to reach Grace. He sent flowers to her apartment, but she returned them unopened. He called her phone, but she had changed her number. He even went to the community center where she taught art classes. But the director told him she had taken a leave of absence. It was Robert who finally brought news of Grace's whereabouts. Sir, I found her. She's staying at a women's shelter downtown. She quit her job here and apparently gave up her apartment. Nathaniel felt like he had been punched in the stomach. A shelter? She's living in a shelter because of me. That evening, Nathaniel did something he hadn't done since he was a child. He got down on his knees in his empty penthouse and prayed to whatever forces might be listening. Please, he whispered to the darkness, give me one more chance to make this right. The answer came in an unexpected form. As Nathaniel sat at his desk the next morning trying to figure out how to approach Grace without making things worse, Robert knocked on his door. Sir, there's someone here to see you. A Mr. David Sterling. He says it's about Grace Mitchell. Oh, da. The man who entered Nathaniel's office was tall and lean, with kind eyes and prematurely gray hair. He carried himself with quiet confidence and looked at Nathaniel with obvious disapproval. Mr. Brooks, David said without preamble, I'm David Sterling. I grew up with Grace at St. Catherine's Children's Home. My real name is Timothy. Though I suppose you wouldn't know that since you've been lying to her about your own identity. Nathaniel's heart stopped. Timothy? You're Timothy? Grace told me about her childhood friend, David continued, ignoring Nathaniel's shock. About how he was adopted and promised to come back for her? She never stopped believing in that promise, you know? Even as an adult, she kept hoping that somewhere out there was someone who would love her unconditionally. I do love her unconditionally, Nathaniel said desperately. That's why I lied. I wanted her to know me as just a man, not as my money or my power. David studied him for a long moment. Do you know what Grace is doing right now? She's painting. Even living in a shelter, even with her heart broken, she's still creating beauty. That's who she is, Mr. Brooks. She finds light in the darkness, hope in despair. And you took that gift and crushed it with your deception. Nathaniel felt tears gathering in his eyes. How can I fix this? Tell me how to fix this. I don't know if you can, David replied honestly. But if you really love her, you'll find a way to prove it without lies this time. That night, Nathaniel stood outside the women's shelter where Grace was staying. In his hands, he held the silver locket he had given her that first night in the park, which she had returned along with his coat. But now the locket was open, revealing a tiny photograph inside. A picture of 2 children at St. Catherine's home, a boy and a girl holding hands and smiling at the camera. When Grace finally agreed to see him, they met in the shelter's small garden. She looked exhausted and heartbroken, but still beautiful to Nathaniel's eyes. Grace, he began, his voice breaking, I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness. You're right, Grace said quietly. You don't. Nathaniel held out the locket, the photograph visible in his palm. Do you remember this picture? Grace looked down and gasped. That's me and Timothy. But how do you have this? Because I'm Timothy, Nathaniel said softly. I've been looking for you my whole life, Millie. Even when I didn't remember your real name, even when the memories were buried under years of loneliness and business deals. My heart never stopped searching for you. Grace stared at him in shock, her mind reeling. No, that's impossible. Timothy was kind and gentle and honest. You're nothing like him. I became someone else, Nathaniel admitted, tears streaming down his face. The family that adopted me, they were cold and focused only on success. They changed my name, sent me to elite schools, taught me that emotions were weakness. But when I found you again, when I saw you sleeping on that bench, something inside me remembered how to feel. Grace was crying now too, her hand reaching. Unconsciously, for the space where the locket used to rest, you were Timothy all along? I never stopped being Timothy, not deep down. You brought him back to life, Grace. You made me remember what love feels like, what hope feels like, what it means to be human. They stood there in the garden, two broken souls, finally seeing each other clearly for the first time, Grace thought. Of all the nights they had talked about their childhoods, how Nathan had always seemed to understand her pain so perfectly. Now she knew why. I love you, Nathaniel said simply. Not Nathan the security guard, not Nathaniel the CEO, but me. Timothy, the boy who promised to come back for you. I kept my promise, Grace. It just took me 20 years to find you. Grace looked into his eyes and saw the boy she had loved so dearly all those years ago. I love you too, she whispered. I've loved you my whole life, even when I didn't remember. Your face, when they kissed this time, it felt like coming home after a very long journey. They held each other in the garden as snow began to fall around them, two hearts finally healing from decades of separation. 6 months later, Grace stood in her own art gallery, surrounded by paintings that told the story of love lost and found again. Nathaniel, now simply called Timothy by those who mattered most, stood beside her as they watched people admire her work. Are you happy? He asked, squeezing her hand. Grace looked around at the life they had built together, based on truth and trust and unconditional love. I'm home, she said simply. Completely home. And in that moment, surrounded by beauty and love and the promise of forever. Both of them knew that some stories really do have happy endings.